All right, everybody. I've got another question to answer. What are the best game controllers? We've all used game controllers, no doubt about that. If you haven't, then why are you even watching this video? It's the key to playing video games. And in this video, we're gonna be taking a retrospective across all the controllers that I own personally, most of them at least. And we're gonna determine which one is the best. I did a video similar to this with console design, and I decided to do it with controllers. So, controllers are a topic, people have talked about kind of extensively at this point, I feel like, but, I feel like I gotta put my 2 cents into controllers because everyone has their preferences for controllers, and yeah, I just want to talk about them. Starting with the oldest controller I have, this is the NES controller, and I gotta say, this controller is still pretty darn good to this day. It's one of the most simple controllers ever. It is a rectangle with 2 buttons, B and A, and a D-pad. I mean, it doesn't get more simple than that. It's the bare basics for a controller, and developers were really able to utilize this thing to its fullest potential. They really were able to make the most out of this thing. One thing a lot of people will bring up with this controller is the sharp edges of the rectangle shape, and honestly, it never really bothered me that much. Maybe it's just the way I hold it, but like people say this thing just really digs into their palms, and honestly, I never had that issue, but that was an issue people complained about back in the day, so I'll give it some credit. What kind of bothers me with this controller is the D-pad. Now the D-pad is pretty darn good, but honestly, it kind of makes my thumb hurt after a long play session because the D-pad is actually kind of sharp on this controller. There was even a term coined from it called Nintendo thumb, and it's just like a pain that happens when you just like use the D-pad for a long time. So yeah, the NES controller has its minor issues, but it's very good overall. But this wasn't, technically the first iteration of this controller. The first iteration of this controller was with the Famicom in Japan. For those who don't know, that's the Japanese, almost said North America, that's the Japanese NES. Honestly, I think the Famicom controllers actually look a little bit more comfortable, but what kills them is that they are hardwired to the console. So the NES, the North American NES, this had a cord that you actually plugged into the console. I know, it's an insane concept. But on the Famicom, why did they make it hardwired? That is one of the worst design choices. That is not aged well at all. It's truly horrendous. I do want to own a Famicom at some point for just the historical value. Would I actually use it a lot? Hell no. We're not done with the NES though. We're gonna be talking about the controller that released with the NES top loader and the Famicom AV, which is actually the NES I own. Yes, I do not own a North American NES. I own a Famicom AV because I don't know. But this controller came with my Famicom AV, and it's the same one that came with the NES top loader in North America. And this controller, it kind of sucks, I'm not gonna lie. When you first hold it, you're like, oh my gosh, this is so much more comfortable with the rounded edges that take, a lot of design cues from the Super Nintendo controller, which we will get into. It's called the dog bone. I don't know if I said that, but yeah, it does kind of look like a dog bone, I won't lie. But what really kills this controller for me are the B and A button placements. They're angled, which that's my first issue with it. The angled buttons, it's just such a dumb choice because your thumb does not naturally rest like that. Yes, you can kind of get around it, but it's dumb. I don't like that. Now, the second issue with the buttons is they're slightly spaced out more, and a lot of people don't bring this up or even notice, but I think that's what truly kills this controller. It's just slightly more spaced out, and it's hard to hold B and then press A at the same time with them just being having a wider gap in the middle. It's horrible. The D-pad is pretty solid. It would have been the definitive NES controller if they just didn't angle the controllers like that. Yes, some games that won't be an issue, but it's not a good controller in my opinion. So before we move on to the Super Nintendo, we must talk about the Sega Genesis controller. This is the 3-button controller that originally released with the Sega Genesis. This controller is very, very good. I really do enjoy this controller. It's very big, especially compared to the NES controller and the Master System controller, which came out, that was the Sega's last console before the Genesis. That controller sucks. Used it at a convention once. It's a terrible controller. The D-pad is so stiff, the buttons are bad, it's terrible. So Sega stepped up their game with the Genesis, and yeah, this is very good. The D-pad is still a little stiff, but it ain't that bad. I really do quite like this controller. Thankfully, they did fix the D-pad stiffness in later revisions of the Genesis controller. I don't have the exact revision, but I do have something pretty similar to what that D-pad would feel like on the later revision. This is the Genesis Mini controller. Yeah, this was released in 2019, and the D-pad, it has so much more range with it. It feels so much better. So if you're looking for a Genesis 3-button controller, definitely get the one with the better D-pad. There's like a specific model number that it's called. I don't know like exactly the model number. I don't happen to own it. This is the closest thing I have to that. But yeah, if you want to get it, if you want a good 3-button controller.
So I decided to just come in here and add a little more clarity to this. That controller, it doesn't have like a specific model number. All the Genesis 3-button controllers I was able to find have the same model number of 1650. Basically, the way you can find this controller with a good D-pad, you just really have to look at the D-pad and make sure like the D-pad, like the circular part aren't like super close to each other. I'll zoom in on here on the screen to kind of show what it looks like. There should be a gap between the circle part and the D-pad. So that's how you're able to tell which one is a good D-pad for your Sega Genesis 3-button controller. Anyways, back to the video.
Moving on back to Nintendo, we have the Super Nintendo and the Super Famicom controller. These controllers, I mean, they're basically the same thing. We will get into the differences in a bit, but I mean, these controllers are just absolutely beautiful. This controller is one of my favorite controllers of all time. It's so perfect. I just absolutely love the way this thing is shaped. It fits so perfectly in the hands. The diamond layout was so revolutionary, and it's still used today, which is just it's insane that it's still used today. You can easily hold down like the Y button to run in something like Donkey Kong Country or Mario World, or holding down like a Mega Shot in Mega Man X, and then you just press B to jump, and it's just, you seamlessly move like that. It is so beautiful. The D-pad on this thing is so much better than the NES D-pad. It doesn't have the sharpness that the NES D-pad had. It is so good. And the L and R buttons, absolutely revolutionary. Again, still used today. Just super revolutionary. These two controllers are some of the best of all time. But there are two key differences between these two controllers. So obviously the colors of the buttons are different. The Super Famicom controller, I love the colored buttons of this thing. It is absolutely beautiful. It's such a fun look to it. Super iconic. But I like how the Super Nintendo buttons look too. A lot of people are like, what a downgrade. But honestly, I like how these look a lot. Like, I love how classy the purple colors they chose are. It looks super nice. I love how this one looks. Both of them look awesome, but the buttons feel different between the two. So the Y and X buttons on the Super Famicom controller are convex. So all the buttons on this controller, they all feel the same. It's not that hard to tell the difference between the buttons, but on the Super Nintendo controller, they made the controllers concave with the X and Y buttons. And honestly, I kind of prefer the feel of that. It's just more defined, and I like it more. But either way, I mean, it doesn't matter that much. They're both 10 out of 10 controllers. It really doesn't matter that much. Moving on back to Sega. With the advent of fighting games like Street Fighter 2 and Mortal Kombat, you needed 6 buttons for those games. So, you know, the Super Nintendo, it already had 6 buttons with the shoulder buttons, but the Sega Genesis controller only had 3. But Sega came in and delivered with this absolute masterclass of a controller. This is the Sega Genesis 6-button controller. I mean, what a step up from the Sega Genesis 3-button controller. This is one of my favorite controllers ever, right up there with the Super Nintendo controller. It is so good. I like how this controller is smaller than the 3-button controller. You know, the buttons, they all feel great. But what really sells this controller for me is the amazing D-pad. This is perhaps the greatest D-pad ever made. It is so perfect. It is a somewhat soft D-pad, but it has such a fine range of movement. You can easily fire in all 8 directions within a game, like a shoot 'em up game, where the Super Nintendo controller kind of struggled at firing in all 8 directions. But I mean, it would still work just fine, but man, this is just perfect for 8-directional games. I cannot stress enough, if you do not have this controller for your Sega Genesis, please get one. It is so good. Moving on to the 5th generation of consoles, we have the Sony PlayStation controller. This controller, it's not that good, honestly. I mean, it certainly did the job when it came out. It's basically just a souped up Super Nintendo controller, but it's also worse, so I don't know. What really kills this controller is the D-pad is just, like, the PlayStation D-pads are just, they're not good. I do not like PlayStation D-pads very much. I just don't like how all the directional arrows, like, they're separated. I do not like that at all. This makes shoot 'em ups an absolute pain in the ass on the PlayStation. It's just not a good D-pad. And this controller, I mean, you look at this thing, we're so used to how PlayStation controllers look now with the double analog sticks. This just looks weird nowadays. It's just weird, man. But this is the controller that originally released with the PlayStation 1, which is really interesting. Now, we all know how this story goes. So Sony, they made the original PlayStation 1 controller, and then they released the DualShock controller. You know, we all know the DualShock, come on. We all know this controller, but did you know that there was a controller that was released in between the DualShock and the original controller? You may not notice it at first, but this is a different controller. This is the dual analog controller. You will be able to tell pretty quickly though, because the analog sticks are different. With the dual analog controller, these are concave sticks, so it feels kind of weird because I'm just so used to the DualShock controller. Very interesting. They're plastic as well, which kind of sucks. And another thing you'll notice is the grips are like way thicker. Well, not thicker, but they're longer, and it's really interesting. I almost kind of prefer. Oh, the cord just dropped. I almost kind of prefer how the long grips feel. I really like that about it. But you know, it's not that much of a difference, so it doesn't really matter that much. It's just such a weird controller. Also, there's like a thing with the trigger on the back, and it's like there's like a thing on the side. You'll be able to see on the video. And yeah, the DualShock, I am kind of tempted to say that, I mean, it's kind of an upgrade to the dual analog. I mean, it's a better controller, I'm not gonna lie. I still haven't used this that much. I literally just got this controller for the purposes of the video. The sticks just feel a lot better on this one, in my opinion. I don't know, maybe something is wrong with this, but I feel like the sticks are just like grinding on this thing. I don't know what's going on there, but these feel a lot more smooth. I do like the PlayStation controller for 3D games and some 2D games, but the analog stick placement always felt weird to me, and even though this was like, you know, one of the earliest 3D controllers, so it's not like that weird. And I like how it does emphasize 2D games with having the D-pad up there, but you know, it'll always be kind of weird to me, but you get used to it. It's really not that bad. Yeah, I do really like how big the sticks are. Yeah, the PS1 controller, you know, they're all kind of a mixed bag for me, kind of overrated controllers in my opinion, but they do the job just fine. And then Sega entered the ring in the 5th generation of consoles, and they gave us this absolutely beautiful controller. This is the Sega Saturn controller. I love this controller. It is obviously an evolution of the Genesis 6-button controller, but oh my God, it feels so much better. I absolutely love how this thing feels. It fits perfectly in your hands. The button layout's still amazing. I like the triggers a lot. They feel like computer mice. They use like micro switches. I love that, but oh my God, the D-pad on this thing is like it's the best D-pad ever made. It's slightly better than the Genesis 6-button D-pad. This thing is oh my God, it's so good. Words cannot comprehend how much of a masterpiece of a controller this is. This is way better than any of the PlayStation controllers I just showed. Oh my God, like this is peak comfort with a controller. This is like probably the best 2D games controller. Absolutely amazing. But Sega of America, they were like, no, we hate comfort and fun. We're gonna redesign the controller. I don't have the controller with me right now, but this is the North American Sega Saturn controller. It's called the Model 1. And yeah, this controller, I've used it at a convention. It is absolute doo-doo. It is not a good controller at all. Compared to this thing, like, it's such a downgrade in so many ways. Like, this controller is a masterpiece, but that controller just sucks. And I didn't want to buy it for this video because I'm really not gonna have much use of it. Because I'm never gonna use that thing. Like, at least those PS1 controllers I bought for this video, might actually use them. But with this US Saturn controller, I'm not gonna use it. Thankfully, we did get the Japanese Saturn controller over in North America eventually. Thank God, because like, the original one it's so bad. The Japanese one, this version of the Saturn controller, 10 out of 10. Best controller ever. We also got the Sega Saturn 3D controller. And this controller, I'm not gonna lie, this is one of the most underrated controllers, maybe not ever, but I think this controller gets really unappreciated. Because people look at this thing and they're like, wow, like this thing looks really weird and probably uncomfortable, but let me tell you, well, it's slightly uncomfortable, but it's really not that bad. The thumbstick, let's just get the elephant out of the room there. It's like a nub. It's really weird, I won't lie, but you do get used to it. It really ain't that bad. This controller is synonymous with Nights into Dreams, which is probably like the most popular Sega Saturn game ever. If you're playing Nights into Dreams with a regular Saturn controller, yeah, good luck, buddy. It's not really fun with that controller. I mean, it works, but it's so much better with the analog stick. Some other games used it, notably Burning Rangers, also another Sonic Team game. That game's pretty good, and yeah, play that game with this controller as well. It still has the amazing 6-button layout. It also has triggers, analog triggers, which is pretty awesome. And it also has the amazing Sega Saturn D-pad, though it does feel a little weird in like this kind of odd position, but it works just fine. It still feels pretty awesome. And yeah, this is a great controller. You can also do this. I don't know what the hell this was for, but you can do that. Hopping on over back to Nintendo, we have one of the most divisive controllers of all time. This is the Nintendo 64 controller. This thing, I like the N64 controller, but I don't love it. It's kind of weird, but it also kind of works kind of okay, actually. I feel like people really overhate on this controller. It's really not that bad once you get used to it. When I first saw this controller, I thought it was like the weirdest thing, but I always wanted to hold it because it just looked so odd. But it looks like a lot of fun. But what isn't a lot of fun is the stupid analog stick. Now, the analog stick, it has a very fine range of movement, and it's really nice for that. But it just grinds up over time, and it's gonna get loose because it's plastic on plastic, guys. It's not a great stick. There's so many N64 control sticks that are loose. One of mine included. I have like the purple clear one, and yeah, that one is very loose. And when it's loose, it feels horrible to use. Like you need to get an N64 controller with a good stick if you want to have a good time. Also, if you want to have a good time with this controller, please hold it correctly. Like I see people holding it like this, and I'm like, what's your problem, dude? Like the prong is here for a reason, dude. Like, it's not rocket science. Like, it's obviously you're supposed to hold it like this. Like, come on, guys. Anyways, you can also hold it like this for certain games, and in the 2D way, like you do it for 2D games like Mischief Makers, which I actually just made a video about. Go check that out. The D-pad on here is pretty good. There's only like 2 face buttons, which is kind of interesting, but you also have the C buttons for like camera controls. It also is used for some like, actions like in Mischief Makers notably. And then there's the Z button on the back, which yeah, it's kind of cool. It's just like kind of hidden back there, you know what I mean? But yeah, the N64 controller is cool. Oh, and you put the memory card in the controller. It's kind of weird. I don't know what the hell was going on there. And like the rumble pack. N64 controller, it's a mixed bag, but it really ain't that bad, but it's not great. Moving on to the 6th generation of consoles that started in 1998 with the Sega Dreamcast. This controller, it's not good. I mean, it's fine, but it's honestly a bit of a downgrade from the Saturn 3D controller. Yes, I will say its form factor is a lot more comfortable. I'll give it that. I mean, the Saturn 3D controller, that thing was a freaking circle with 2 like kind of weirdly shaped handles. It was not the most comfortable controller, but it was made up for with the D-pad and the 6-button layout. But this is just like, honestly, like the stick might be worse. I feel like it's not as precise. Like, I'm slipping around with this controller all the time with that nub with the Saturn 3D controller, like that. Your thumb ain't going anywhere. Okay, it might, because it's still plastic, so it's not like super slippery. It's still probably slippery, but I just, this thumbstick, it's not that good. And the D-pad, like Sega, you had the best D-pad on the market, and you had to ruin it with this piece of shit D-pad. Like, what were you doing? And what, come on, like the 6-button layout, like you really like got rid of that? Like, come on. The 6-button layout was so good, and then you use the diamond layout. I mean, the diamond layout's good, but like, come on, like that was your thing. And these buttons don't even feel that good. Like they're super tiny, and they're like spaced out weirdly. It's just, this controller's a mess, dude. But it looks pretty cool, I'll give it that. And it uses these little memory cards you put into the controller. These are the VMUs. It kind of looks like a Game Boy. And yeah, you can use this thing to play little mini games that you can get from game. I've never actually done that, but you can play games on this that you can get through Dreamcast games. And it also just plays little animations through the controller, like this. And that's pretty cool for that. It can also display like, sometimes games actually used it for like certain elements of the game, which is really cool. Another thing about this controller is that like the cord, it goes down the bottom of the controller. Like, what the hell was going on there? Now, yeah, okay, the VMU was right there. Okay, so they couldn't just have it going out like right where the VMU would be. But you can just, I don't know, put it through there. There's like a whole thing of freaking plastic right there that you could have put it through. Why didn't they just do that? I don't know what the hell was going on, but what they did let you do is you could put the cord like this on this little thing, and it stays there. And there you go. It goes from the top now, but stupid. Moving on to the year 2000, we have the PlayStation 2 controller. And hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Yeah, it's literally just the DualShock, and it has pressure sensitive buttons now. there's not really much else to say about it. Looks cool in black though. Next up is the original Xbox controller. This is the original Xbox controller. This is called the Duke. I do not own it. This controller is certainly something. I have never used this controller, but just looking at it, I mean, like, it's just weird. Like, it is probably like the biggest controller ever released by a console manufacturer. The buttons are like ovals, like, it's just weird. There's a giant ass Xbox logo on there too. That's a cool logo, but like, it takes up like half the damn controller. Like, it's a weird controller, and hopefully I can own it someday. I don't know. I should have just bought it for the video, but whatever. I don't really care. But what I do have is the original Xbox S controller, and if you want an original Xbox controller for your original Xbox, which you need it. Get this one. This is the one to go with. This controller is pretty darn good. I won't lie. I do really like the original Xbox S controller. When you first hold it, you're like, oh, it's kind of weird, especially compared to like the 360 controller, which we're all pretty used to at this point. It's kind of bulky still a little bit, but honestly, you get used to it, and I like this controller quite a bit. It has pressure sensitive buttons, I believe. The sticks, they're all right. The D-pad, it's not the best, but it's all right, but like not many games really on the original Xbox really use the D-pad. Yeah, this is a good controller. Now, in the 6th generation of consoles, Nintendo absolutely stepped up their game with the GameCube controller. This is the Wavebird variant. I have the wired version here, but the GameCube controller, whichever one you get, like, this is one of the best controllers I've ever used. It's one of my favorite controllers of all time. Debatably one of the best controllers ever. This controller, it just perfectly fits into your hands. I love the button layout. The diamond layout is kind of perfect, but you got the big A button, all the buttons surrounding it. It's actually really unique, and it works well for like 3D games. And one underrated aspect I feel like with this controller is the analog sticks. They have an octagonal gate. They're very noisy, but I love the octagonal 8-directional gate that you have with it. It makes games really precise. It's not that big of a deal for most games, but I just love how it feels like controlling games with the stick on this. The game that really takes advantage of the GameCube control stick though is the Super Monkey Ball game, Super Monkey Ball 1 and 2. Absolutely love those games, but yeah, those games are just absolutely beautiful with this analog stick, because that game requires pinpoint precision, and this analog stick will give you that pinpoint precision. And it's not even the octagonal gate that specifically makes it precise. It just moves in 8 directions. So that is worth noting. The C stick, it works pretty well, but it is small, and that is kind of an issue. And the Z button, there's only one. There's only one of them. There's not a Z button on the other side of the controller, and yeah, it's just kind of like a weird button, and it's weird. But the triggers on this thing, they're analog triggers, which we've seen before with the Dreamcast and Saturn 3D controllers and the original Xbox controller. But on this, it's different because you do one press down and then boom. That's like a light press down, and then right, you hear this? So wait, let me show you. I'll just show it on screen. What am I doing? Absolutely ingenious design, and developers definitely took advantage of that, notably in games like Super Mario Sunshine. So yeah, the GameCube controller is up there as like one of my favorite controllers. Now, throughout the rest of this video, we will be exclusively talking about Nintendo controllers because I don't know. This is the Wii Remote. This is a pretty strange controller, all things considered. Completely different from the PS3 and Xbox 360 controllers. Those are a lot more traditional. Or this was the oddball. It's a very simple controller. It just has a D-pad, 2 buttons. You can rotate it like this, and you can play NES games specifically with like the Virtual Console and like a lot of 2D games. So it's very versatile for that. You do it like this with the pointer, which is everyone knows that at this point. You know, the motion controls, make sure wear your wrist strap. The motion controls, you know, very, very innovative. Got grandma to play video games with like Wii Sports. Absolutely insane. I mean, there's still retirement homes that play like Wii Sports. It's honestly beautiful. Though this controller does limit what you can do with games. Thankfully though, they gave us an analog stick in the form of the nunchuck. You just attach it to the controller like this, and then there you go. You have yourself an analog stick, and it works pretty well. Uses the same octagonal gate as the GameCube controller, so that's awesome. Now, you know, the motion controls were revolutionary with this controller, but it wasn't quite perfect. It wasn't nearly as precise as I feel like Nintendo wanted it to be. So that's where they gave us the Motion Plus adapter that you plug in to the controller, and yeah, you have better motion controls. They give us gyro controls. This was required for games like Wii Sports Resort, and yeah, it gives you a very fine range of movement. It's really cool, actually. Wii Sports Resort is one of the best Nintendo games. I need to cover that at some point, but yeah, it kind of like extends like the Wii remote, so it's kind of weird. But thankfully, we got the Wii Motion Plus built in. This is one of the Wii Motion Plus controllers. You can tell because it says Wii Motion Plus inside, and yeah, you don't need that big, big ass little thing at the bottom. It's all built in. If you want a Wii remote, this is probably the one to get, but these original ones will suffice you just fine for most games. There are also the classic controllers, which I do not happen to own, but those are an option if you want a more traditional controller, especially the Classic Controller Pro, because that one has like handles on it. So get that one. And here we have the Wii U gamepad. This thing, well, it's okay, I guess. I mean, it sufficed you if you didn't have a Pro controller, which I don't have a Pro controller, but that controller looks kind of weird. Because I mean, just look at it. But this thing is also just as weird. Like the Wii U gamepad, it looks kind of stupid, I'm not gonna lie. But it's overall pretty comfortable. It's just very, very bulky. You know, it comes with a stylus like on the DS, so you know, whichever games use that, you know, you can do that on it. It'll suffice. It's pretty all right. Not the best. And honestly, I really do not like the Wii U that much. I feel like people are a little too, got some rose-tinted glasses when it comes to the Wii U. And I know I'm one to speak. I got a lot of rose-tinted glasses for a lot of different things in gaming, but I just think the Wii U was really not that great. You know, there were good games on it, of course, but it wasn't that good. But hey, that's just my opinion. If you like the Wii U, subscribe to the channel, because you know the Wii U is a console, and you should subscribe because I talk about consoles and video games on this channel. Anyways, moving on to the Switch. Here we have the Nintendo Switch Joy-Cons. Yeah, I do not like these. I do not like the Joy-Cons. They're just, I mean, in handheld mode, they work fine enough. It's still not great, however, but it'll suffice in handheld mode. These are very versatile controllers. I'll give them that. Like, they got motion controls. You can flip them on their side and you do quick multiplayer like that. It's very, very cool. But functionality wise, it's just, I mean, it works, but the buttons are so tiny and like super clicky. It's just, they don't feel that good. The sticks are not the best. I mean, they work fine, you know, when they work, because, you know, a lot of them, including these ones that I have right here, have drift on them. Thankfully, I do have a set of purple and, not purple, but the green and pink ones. My pair of those do not drift. Thankfully, I'm super happy about that. But I don't know when, maybe at some point they will start to drift. But these are the ones that came with my Switch when I got it back in May of 2017. Yeah, I don't really like the Joy-Cons. There's the grip as well. If you don't have the Pro controller, this will suffice for like a week, but then you're gonna go insane. and you're gonna wanna get the Nintendo Switch Pro controller. This is another one of my favorite controllers. I love this controller. I mean, it's basically just an Xbox controller, but oh my God, it feels so good. It's super substantial feeling. I love how the analog sticks feel. The buttons are super big and meaty. I just, love that. Triggers aren't analog, which isn't that big of a deal. The only really big issue with this controller is the D-pad. When you press it down, like you shouldn't be able to press a D-pad down like that. It's supposed to like spread out in like different directions, but you can press it down in the middle, and that's really unfortunate because Nintendo, I mean, they popularized the D-pad. They may have even invented it. I don't know, but yeah, that kind of sucks. With this generation of consoles, like they really skimped out on the D-pad. At least on the Joy-Cons, it made sense though, because you know these are meant to be flipped around and used as like one controller. But here, there was no excuse for the D-pad to be like that. But at the end of the day, you know, this is one of the best controllers ever. I love the Pro controller. So we must determine what the best controller is. So let's look through my favorites in this little bunch here. All right, so the Genesis 6-button controller is great. Absolutely love that one. Super Nintendo controller is fantastic controller. I love that controller. GameCube, mwah, beautiful. And Switch Pro controller. Those are my favorites by far. I absolutely love those controllers. And I will give an honorable mention to the Xbox 360 controller. Didn't show in this video, I don't own one, but I've used it plenty of times. I mean, I could have borrowed one, but I don't know, I just didn't do it. But yeah, that controller is really good. I do like the 360 controller, but the best controller in my opinion, it's the Sega Saturn controller. Come on, it doesn't get better than this. This is the best controller that you will ever use for any game ever. I want to play every game with this controller. I won't go that far, but like for 2D games, this is all I want to use. Like this is oh my God. If you don't like the Sega Saturn controller, you're weird, bro. Like you can't be trusted. I don't know what's going on. Like this is the best controller ever made, in my opinion. So that answers the question of the video. Yeah, the Sega Saturn controller is the GOAT. Anyways, thank you guys for watching this retrospective on all these goofy controllers. So if you want more goofy videos like this, please subscribe and comment down below and like the video. Because that's what you're supposed to do, right? I think? I don't know. Anyways, see ya.